Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Christina and I am a naturopath, herbalist, life coach, as well as a carnivore. And here I am talking about all the things. So sometimes I will share on, different health issues that are taking place. Sometimes I'll share on my own journey, and sometimes I will just share some general information. Well, today I'm going to be talking about what my class is being taught in their anatomy and physiology class. So if you're new, I am studying a Bachelor of Health Science at the moment, Bachelor of Health and Medical Science, in the pursuit of then going on to do my doctorate of medicine. And so it's really interesting for me being in this space because it's very different to my previous education in the sense that the things like the anatomy and physiology are still the same, but we come from a slightly different perspective. So, I feel like I need to start things that my teachers are telling me that I know are not quite true or not the full picture. So, for example, a couple of weeks ago in my anatomy and physiology class, the lecturer was talking about different problems that can happen when with different conditions. So, in this particular class, they were talking about the skin. So, they were talking about eczema, psoriasis, etc. They were also talking about some other conditions that might arise. And the answer to what we do for all of those conditions is we shut down the immune system. And I'm like, huh, this is really limited thinking. Like I get it, right? There are times when we do need to do some of those things in emergency medicine to get on top of things, etc. But from a prolonged treatment protocol, we should be asking more questions, which is the why question. Why is this a problem? And so this week in my class, we were talking about bones and we're going through the anatomy and the physiology of bones. And, we've got our osteoclasts that break down the bone. We've got the osteoblasts that build up the bone and how sometimes when we have things like osteoporosis, there's a dysregulation between that process happening because we have remodeling of bone happening all the time. So, we might have damage that's done to bone or those bone cells are dying and we need to build new bone cells. And so there's this remodeling process that happens all the time. Now, in an ideal world, we have that at the same rate. We have it, at the same rate that bone is breaking down, bone is rebuilding as well. That's what in an ideal world to maintain bone mass. Now, if we are needing to rebuild bone, then we need the osteoblast to be working a little bit faster than the osteoclasts, which would be the breaking down process. We need that to happen at a different rate. We need more building than we do breaking down. And so our teacher, who for me has been renowned for sharing about studies that he clearly has never read, because the way that he talks about them tells us he doesn't know what the study actually, the conclusions that they came to. He only knows what other people have told him that he has told them about it, which is actually not what it's told them about, which I think is hilarious because we get lectured about, having to go and check our sources. You have to check that that's what that person has said. And yet he demonstrates on a consistent basis that he has not actually read the specific study that he is referring to or the specific thing that he is referring to, and only going off of what somebody else has said about that person, that study, that thing. It drives me bananas. Uh, Partly because A is a double standard there. The other part of that is often he's coming to it and sharing information as if it was fact that is not actually fact. And he's doing it to young minds. So, I'm in my 40s, so I have been around the block a few times. I see a lot of these things. My whole business is really about looking for the things that people aren't saying to help them unpack their unconscious beliefs. It's looking at things differently, like, what might be going on there that we haven't yet looked at. All of that type of stuff. Like my whole business is designed around that. So I'm pretty clued into that. But the vast majority of my cohort are made up of people who are younger than me, that are maybe 19, 20, maybe straight out of college or high school. And, this is their first academic study that's not, not in that situation or setting that they were in previously. And so they're impressionable minds, and this is the foundation of their study. So this is part of why it drives me a bit up the wall. Because one of the things that was said in our last lecture yesterday um, was that there are some people out there who just don't trust medicine, and gives this derogatory sort of context to these people who just don't trust medicine. And I'm like, Yeah, they have a good right to not trust medicine when it is one of the largest killers. Um, we should be we should be questioning medicine, right? And it's actually in the process of questioning medicine that we get better medicine. So when we're told not to question medicine or not to question the science, we're literally being told to do unscientific things. We're literally being told the opposite of what creates good medicine and what creates good science and what creates good research, even. Anyway, in yesterday's thing, he was talking about HRT. And of course, the buzzword in my space is HRT. Like I'm even seeing nutritionists and naturopaths, etc., recommending to women that they go to their doctors and get on HRT. Uh, the the pharmaceutical companies that, so, naturopathy works fairly similar to medicine in the sense that you might have the supplement company who is also like they're just a leg off of the pharmaceutical company, will hold a conference and the practitioners will go to that conference, and at that conference they'll be told the new research about this particular ailment or condition, and then what products might be helpful for that, right? So we get a similar type of education if you go to those things. Now, the thing that's been happening with HRT is that we have been getting a lot of that stuff. Now, I don't go to these things very often. Like one, I'm really not interested in listening to what product does what thing and how much I need to prescribe to blah 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 blah. Like I'm just not interested in that because I don't think it's actually very helpful. Sometimes the educational part is helpful, but I have my education covered in other ways by doing things like my study. And so I didn't get privy to all of it, but what I do hear in my space of other naturopaths is that, they've been having some of these representatives come up and saying, HRT is an important part of blah, 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 blah. And, the the teacher yesterday spoke about this study that was done, I think it was 20 years ago. And it demonstrated that in their study, they demonstrated that HRT increased the risks of things like breast cancer. And then that was used to stop all these women from taking HRT. And then the AMA, which is the Australian Medical Association, put out a big thing to all the doctors. You need to go and tell people about this study, that it was poorly designed and it was this, only had a small research number of people, etc., etc. And look, it did actually have those things. The interesting part for me is that, now then he goes on to say, now we've got this large body of research that HRT stops women from breaking bones and blah, 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 blah. Because, like, he said his dad was a doctor, and, once they stopped taking their HRT, then their bone density decreased really dramatically, and all these women had breaks and they just didn't get better, and blah, 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 blah. And then now we've got all these studies that say that HRT only causes breast cancer in a certain age group of women, etc., which they don't really worry about because they're too old anyway, and we won't go there, right? But the thing that I find challenging is that, he's talking about HRT, and he's talking about it from the perspective that progesterone and estrogen slow down the osteoclasts, which are the ones that break down the bone. They slow down their activity. So they decrease their activity, which is why their bone density isn't breaking down so much. And then in the next breath, he talks about how he himself is on testosterone, and he has to take testosterone because he's got some bone issues because of, some other medical issues that he's got where they've, shut down his immune system. And so his testosterone is low. So he takes testosterone because that helps his bone density, etc., etc. And I'm sitting there and I'm just like I'm flabbergasted, right? I'm flabbergasted because what I see is this mass medication of a population of our people, so our women in particular. It's mass medication of menopausal women. But what we don't see is people asking the why question. They're saying, oh, look, their bones breaking down because their progesterone and their estrogen has dropped. But that's a natural process. It's a natural process for estrogen and progesterone to actually drop. So why is it a problem? And is there something that's missing or something that's meant to happen that isn't happening? And for me, I look at it from a really different perspective. And I'm not saying if you're on HRT, stop taking HRT and that you shouldn't take HRT. I'm saying what I would rather you do is actually expand your thinking. If you are taking it, still expand your thinking. because there's still something that's missing. If you have to medicate for a natural process that happens, unless you've got an injury or you've been in a car accident, excuse me, and you've lost like that organ, you don't have that organ anymore, or there's been some type of damage, like, for some women, for example, who've had hysterectomies because of their pregnancies and so on. There's a whole bunch of reasons, right? But in a normal everyday person, without some of those extraneous circumstances, why do you need to medicate for a natural biological process? And if you are needing to medicate for a natural biological process, is something going wrong? And that's the question that I wish that they would ask instead. Because the question that they're asking is, um, what is reducing their bone density? Well, their progesterone and their estrogen have stopped, so their osteoclasts are speeding up and breaking down bone at a more rapid pace. But what they're not asking is that what's meant to actually naturally happen? And when we ask that question and we see there are doctors who have done research into this, and there is the research out there around this, is that actually what's meant to happen is for a woman going through menopause, estrogen and progesterone are meant to start to come down, but what is meant to happen is testosterone rises. And as testosterone rises, we actually have this new phase of life that comes through. There's new vitality that often comes through for women when they move into menopause if their testosterone is rising. And if that testosterone is rising, they get a new lease on life. Like it's that second wind that women get where they're meant to, get this new vitality, this new drive to be able to go out and do the things that they maybe wanted to do earlier in life, but they were in their child raising phase where they were, breastfeeding, having babies, all of that type of stuff. And they just didn't have the capacity at that point to go after those things. Now they're meant to be able to have that second wind to go after it. It's often where you'll see women now create businesses in their 40s and 50s and 60s. It's where you'll see them take up new adventures that they've always wanted to do, but they just didn't have capacity, energy, or space for before. It's where you'll see them like now passionately pursuing things that they've loved all of their life, but now they have the resources in energy and the hormone drive to do so. And that's what's meant to happen. The other part of that is testosterone has demonstrated itself to be quite protective against things like breast cancers. Like there's a doctor in the US who uses testosterone pilules to actually put breast cancers into remission. And so there's this protective element that comes through with testosterone as well. And what's not happening when we're just having the HRT discussion and we're not asking any of these extra questions is that we're just pumping women through full of HRT, trying to keep them at the hormonal level that they were in their reproductive phase, but not asking, is there a reason that that should close? And what might be not happening that should be happening, which is that testosterone rise. And there's a couple of things there is a lot of women have got insulin resistance, and insulin resistance plays havoc when it comes to hormonal conversion. So we're not making the hormones that we need to be making because the insulin is too high. And so instead of dealing with things like insulin resistance, we're just putting people on HRT. Instead of actually asking the question of like, have they got the building blocks for testosterone in their bodies? We're just putting people on HRT. And those building blocks for testosterone are often, a meat or a heavy protein-based diet and high fats. And women for most of their lives have been told don't eat fat and eat more vegetables and don't eat protein, like that red meat's going to cause cancer and all of those types of things. They have been given these messages that then actually diminish their ability to make testosterone in the later phase of their life. And so for me, it's very interesting, but also mildly frustrating. Thankfully, I'm an online student at this point, so I can like I have to resist not typing furiously into my chat bar. And thankfully, the people around me, I'm often in the library, um, and not necessarily hearing what I'm thinking because I'm very frustrated in hearing some of this information that gets told to those early early practitioners, like the people in my class, they're the next generation of doctors and dentists and physios and all of that type of stuff. And they're getting this information. And it bothers me because they're not being told to question. They're not being told to look beyond what we currently know. Because when we look beyond what we currently know, that's when we get better science. That's when we get better things for people. It's when we get better quality of life for people, and we understand the physiology of what's actually happening for them versus just being told the same old rhetoric. Like, the pill doesn't fix the period for the person who's got endometriosis. It just fixes the symptom. It doesn't fix the root cause of the problem. And while we might use things to actually help with symptoms, and those things are actually quite vital. Like, if we have somebody in that situation with extreme osteoporosis, we may consider things like HRT as part of the treatment protocol. But if we never look at the what's missing for them factor and help them with that, then we actually won't get to the point of fixing the problem. We just keep them medicated until they die. And some people might be happy with that. I don't know that I would be happy with that. And I'm sure there's a vast majority of other people who don't want that for their life either. They don't want to be tied to the pharmaceutical industry for the rest of their lives if they can absolutely help it. And when we won't look beyond the big farm sort of teaching, we never get to the place of finding better answers. So there's my little rant for today. I need to probably start a things my teacher said without getting myself into trouble podcast, but maybe it'll come after I've got all my certificates and so on. But there's my rant for today. I hope you're having an amazing day. If you want to chat about this and more, feel free to come and join me in the carnivore support group. Type it in the comments below. I'm happy to answer questions in there, and maybe I'll do a video on them. That's it for me today. I hope you have an amazing day. Bye for now. See you later.